Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel will be Jim Amidon with his talk titled, "Oh, the Places You'll Go." Jim Amidon is a Wabash graduate who spent so little time on campus as an undergrad that he felt compelled to stick around after graduation. Now in his 37th year at the college, he is the president's chief of staff, director of strategic communications, and secretary of the college. In spite of his longevity, Jim is the lesser known and far less important Amidon on campus. He's proud of the work of his wife and life partner, Chris, who takes care of all Wabash men in the Student Health Center. Jim and Chris were privileged to tag along with 18 Latin and Greek students and their professors on an immersion trip to the Bay of Naples over spring break. Let's give a warm welcome to Jim.
Good morning, Wabash. Good morning. Thank you. You didn't say Mr. Amidon. That's my dad. I don't know about the rest of you. I'm missing Italian espresso this morning. I've given a lot of chapel talks in my time at Wabash, but as Ian Holmberg mentioned to me when he approached me Tuesday to do this, I haven't done one in a while. And yes, it was Tuesday, and I was jet lagged, but thank you for the opportunity. It was in early November when I received what I think was probably the greatest gift I could have imagined. Classics professor Jeremy Hartnett, you guys know who he is. He came charging into my office with his usual gusto and enthusiasm. He pulled up a chair. This was a no notice, and very matter-of-factly asked, "Hey, do you and Chris want to go with me on my immersion trip to the Bay of Naples?" Not a bad morning. But in the blink of an eye, I instantly came up with all these reasons not to go. It was a busy and unrelenting fall semester, some of you may recall. I was tired, pretty worn out, and honestly, I hadn't taken the advice we give each and every Wabash man when he enrolls here. I didn't bring my passport. Seriously, my passport expired in May, and I had done nothing to renew it. Meanwhile, Chris, who didn't have a passport, had done all the paperwork to submit her application but didn't put it in the mail until after Jeremy had invited us. See, Chris has this thing on her lifetime bucket list. She's always wanted to go to Italy. So I said to Professor Hartnett, "I'll talk to Chris tonight and get back to you first thing in the morning. Promise, first thing in the morning." A week later, I had decided we were going to do it, and I emailed Jeremy and said, "We're in." So on March 1, the heavens don't want this talk to happen, do they? At least we're getting some rain. On March 1, as we loaded the vans here in front of the chapel to head out for Italy, I realized that I was stepping into a full circle moment. I traveled with the legendary classics professor John Fisher, who was here for like 40 years, when he took his last immersion class to Rome. So I went to Italy with John Fisher 20-some years ago. Now, you may not know it, but John Fisher was Jeremy Hartnett's advisor, and Jeremy Hartnett has the position John Fisher vacated when he retired. And for just a little bit more background, I did write a works in progress feature story about a very young Jeremy Hartnett from New York when he was a student here in the 90s. Anyway, we're about to leave. We've loaded the vans, and Professor Hartnett asked me to help him get some stuff from his office. It's a big box of 3-ring binders that we were going to ask every student to carry with him on the trip to Italy. Obviously, they serve two purposes, these binders. Obviously, they had a detailed itinerary that laid out everywhere we were going to go on our 10 to 12-hour excursions each and every day. There were also materials in there that the students had submitted. Background on their research projects, maps, pictures, and descriptions of translations of inscriptions. But the other purpose of the 3-ring binders, and this is important, was to lend seriousness to our travels. Professors Hartnett and Gorey were able to get us access to places and sites most tourists never get to see. An ancient bathhouse at Herculaneum, the Naples Museum's temperature, light, and humidity-controlled room filled with epigraphs and inscriptions, and a 2,000-year-old burial crypt 13 meters underground below a palace in Naples. Having those binders with us demonstrated that our students were working during this immersion trip, not sightseeing. Big difference. Professor Hartnett still had to do a lot of fast talking in Italian to get us into several places. But believe me when I say that the students I was with were working very hard, learning, asking questions at every single stop on our remarkable journey. I don't intend to use this time to give you a complete play-by-play of every one of our full and very full and busy days. We averaged 25,000 steps and over 40 flights of stairs each and every day on rough, uneven cobblestone streets. Instead, though, I want to make the case for the Bring Your Passport marketing line we fed you when we were recruiting you to attend Wabash. Raise your hand if you've been on an immersion trip. That's awesome. Bring your passport. Thanks to the generosity of John and Diane Schrader's remarkable endowment gift, Wabash offers you the opportunity to travel the globe with your classmates and professors basically for free. Sure, you'll pick up costs for lunches and dinners, but the airfare, hotel stays, museum tickets, play tickets, and the endless number of bus, subway, and rail line fees are all covered by the college. I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, the 18 guys I was with last week spent maybe a couple $100 on food. If you drank a lot of wine, maybe a little more. Couple $100 for the chance of a lifetime. You owe it to yourself to take a class with an immersion component at some time before you graduate. Sure, you may have traveled around, maybe traveled abroad with your parents or with a high school class, gone to Washington, D.C., but immersion experiences at Wabash are different, very different. First, in our case, the Greek and Latin students had spent 8 weeks studying the places we visited, learning about them. They had researched, and each knew more about monuments, buildings, inscriptions, grave markers, or cathedrals than anybody else in the class. And then when we got to our destinations, they turned the tables and became our teachers. They became poised teachers in some tough environments, which really blew me away. I'll never forget the morning we visited Pompeii. It was a glorious sunny morning. We'd ventured into a stunning 2,000-year-old amphitheater, and George Shagley, who seems to me to be pretty shy and introverted, stood in front of our group, seated in the amphitheater, to give a presentation on Marcus Hulconius Rufus, who was a really big deal in the first century. Just as George started his talk about Rufus, some tour guide from another group starts singing at the top of his lungs just to demonstrate the acoustics of this amphitheater. George patiently waited for the guy to stop, and he patiently waited as the audiences applauded. Then he started to report out about this inscription honoring Marcus Rufus that was created like 2,000 years ago, that was buried under volcanic ash for like 1,800 years, and it's right there now to see, touch, and experience. And right as George restarts, some random guy just walks right in front of him and starts looking at that very stone that George was translating for our group. Undeterred, George kept going despite the obvious distractions. And then the questions came. And this was the best part. Student after student wanting to know more about this ancient place, the inscription and the marble slab where there was once more or less a throne for old Rufus. Classroom learning, investigative research, and then sharing scholarship with your peers. That's what makes immersion learning unique to Wabash. Another incredible aspect of these trips is something I did pick up on 20 years ago when I went with Professor Fisher to Italy. Wabash men are pulled out of their fraternities and living units, away from their sports teams and their clubs, and they're thrust into new groups of students they know only from the classroom. When you take this interesting mix of people, and in our case, we're talking about a football player, an actor, guys from the Glee Club, bachelor writers and photographers, a play-by-play announcer, a wrestler, serious Catholics, avowed atheists, and super smart word nerds who love deciphering and translating ancient text. and you put all those guys together, something truly amazing happens. Professors Hartnett and Gorey engineered the trip too so that students probably didn't know all of their roommates, or they were tossed together with teammates on scavenger hunts with guys they probably didn't know very well. And by the end of the week, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing each of you felt like you had about a dozen new friends. And if you're like me, you wish like hell you would have gotten to know these guys earlier. Intensifying this fact is the incredible journey we took together. Doctors Hartnett and Gorey could have taken us to Rome and probably had a fairly similar outcome. But instead we went to Pompeii, Herculaneum, Paestum, Naples, and Sorrento, and there is a key difference between those places in Rome. I don't know about the other guys on the trip. I think I went 6 full days and never heard a person speak English. That makes it a little different. There was that one afternoon, we were in the oldest basilica in the world. Professor Hartnett is standing there describing the beautiful Christian mosaics that still survive several thousand years later on the dome. And there's this couple that just sort of gloms on to our group. They were fascinated by Dr. Hartnett's lessons, and I think even more so by the curiosity and the questions of the students. I later found out they were Canadians, they did speak English, and just enjoyed the opportunity to learn alongside our students and professors. So much so that they came back and glommed to us much later in the day just so they could learn a little bit more from our Wabash men. And I think that was it. I didn't hear English the rest of the week except when we got to the airport. So, thrown together with men you barely know and building trusting relationships with them, traveling to a foreign land and learning to navigate busy, narrow urban streets together with scooters going left and right, sharing a commitment to teaching and learning with and from each other, and doing these things while not being able to speak English to the locals, that's immersion learning at Wabash. And it's a very powerful way to create an incredible sense of belonging and build unbreakable bonds of friendship. True brotherhood. And that's why I think each one of you needs to do everything you can to take part in this impressive rite of passage we call immersion learning at Wabash. I want to share a couple of inside baseball one-offs I scribbled down in my brain so I'd never forget them. The guys on the trip will likely know what I'm talking about, but I hope it gives those of you who weren't along for the ride a sense of the experiences we shared together in one life-changing week. We were at Paestum, standing in awe at the very best preserved Greek temples in the world. No, they're not in Greece, they're in Italy. They're literally breathtaking. 3 of them. But it was raining all day, basically, and we pressed on undeterred. We're nearing the end of our time there, and Dr. Gorey was talking about an ancient but majestically well-preserved burial crypt. It was literally raining sideways at this point, and he talked for, 10, 15 minutes. We were cold, soaked to the bone, and Chris and I were sitting there praying that we would soon be on a train back to Pompeii. And Dr. Gorey wrapped up, and I'm packing up the camera ready to go, and then a dozen arms went in the air. The students had questions, and they had comments, and they wanted to give their take on what Dr. Gorey had presented. Speculation about what it might be like to live 2,000 years ago. It was, without a doubt, the best time I've ever had in the rain. Through some careful planning and fast talking in those 3-ring binders, we were able to visit an active excavation site. It's a hypogeum, look it up, dating back 2,400 years, discovered just 100 years ago, and it's 13 meters, 40 feet below street level, in Naples, under a palace. Only 8 of us could go way down in there at a time to keep the temperature and humidity at acceptable levels, and we needed flashlights to see because natural light would just destroy the art and the inscriptions we were there to study. I quickly noticed that the crypt makers had carved fake pillows out of stone to adorn the sarcophagus beds. Fascinating. Blake White got closer and realized that the double pillows had been painted in yellow and blue. And get this, they had tiny red X's painted along what would have been the seam where the cloth came together had it been an actual pillow. Painted on stone 2,400 years ago. Wow. I really enjoyed getting to know Yin-So Kim, a freshman from South Korea who tested somehow into a 300-level Latin course. He gave one of our first public presentations at Herculaneum where he translated an inscription on a marble monument. We were down low in the site, and so I climbed up much higher with my camera to take a better photo from up high, and it was only then that I realized that like 50 other people had crowded around our little group just so they could learn from Yin-So what this inscription had to say. Awesome. And it was on a late night in Sorrento on the coast when Yin-So discovered the wonders of pasta and wine. I wish my photo had better captured the look on Casey Bowling's face when he saw an ocean for the very first time. It was first time on an airplane, right? We were at Cume, Mount Vesuvius in the background. I missed the first shot. I got him to turn around and pose for a second picture. What a trip it was, walking through banks of heavy, wet clouds to reach the summit of Mount Vesuvius. And just when we got to the top and the class had begun to recite a poem, it was a Jeremy Hartnett trip, the sun broke out and gave us the most stunning view of the Bay of Naples you could possibly imagine. Incredible. Somehow, Nate Hovind was able to do a Calvin Klein photo shoot inside a 2,800-year-old Greek temple at Paestum at the only time the entire day the sun came out. I have pictures to prove it. Cole Asbury, taking both Greek and Latin classes, had to give 2 presentations. But like several of us, he was popping decongestant round the clock while fighting off a bug. The same decongestant that about knocked me out cold, he persevered. It was really cool to have the basketball team's play-by-play announcer with us. Whenever I lost sight of the group, which was pretty easy to do given the pace Jeremy keeps, or if we were on the street and I lost sight of the back end of the group or in the bowels of a basement of a museum, all I had to do was listen for Noah McRoberts' voice. I could easily find my way back. What an amazing young man with an intellectual breadth that rivals anyone. One day we literally walked through a mountain at Bagnoli on the coast to discover a 2,100-year-old seaside villa, complete with a theater, spacious dining rooms, and the most spectacular views of the bay we had all week. When I say we walked through the mountain, I mean it. 770 meters, half a mile through a tunnel the Romans carved through stone. 2,000 years ago, big enough to drive a train through. I could tell stories about every single student that was on the trip and every site we visited, but I've probably already gone beyond my allotted time. Asked me to give a chapel talk on short notice, and with jet lag, this is what you get. You're going to get a brain dump, and that's what this has been. But in truth, listen, if you want to lose a few pounds and have your mind blown, just take a walk through an Italian city with Professor Jeremy Hartnett. Nobody, and I mean nobody on this campus, can match his pace, nor his passion, enthusiasm, intellect, and drive. I also want to give a shout out to Professor Matthew Gorey. Barely knew him when we loaded in the vans on March 1st, but I feel like we're old friends just a week later. Thanks for your patience and kindness, and we're sorry that we got you sick. But for the rest of you, the takeaway messages from this, I think, are simple. 1, enroll in a class with an immersion experience as part of it. Don't care if it's Belgium, France, Italy, California, New York, or Ladoga. Just do it. 2, these are not sightseeing tours. They are serious, pedagogically sound, learning and teaching experiences, and you'll get far more out of them the more you put into them, which is exactly what the 18 guys we were with did. They were all in, all the time, even in the rain at Paestum. 3rd and finally, what immersion experiences do better than anything, I think, is to build brotherhood and belonging. Just ask any of the 18 guys on the trip. Many of them are here today. Dr. Seuss once wrote a book called Oh, the Places You'll Go. I hope you've read it. Maybe your mom read it to you when you were a little kid. And this is what he wrote. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. I'll close with two quick anecdotes about what it's like to come back from the Bay of Naples to Crawfordsville. I'm missing that espresso. On Monday, Coach Don Morrell gathered the football team for an important team meeting about the future of the program. I was asked to attend, so when I walked in, Blake White, and I think this is true, I don't think Blake knew me at all 10 days ago. He came over across the room, shook my hand, and asked how I was doing. He smiled, I smiled, and we shared a knowing glance that we had just experienced something very special together. It was almost exactly 24 hours later, and I bumped into Casey Bowling out at the football stadium. Never met the kid before the trip. Knew nothing about him, and yet we started a conversation. It was a little bit about jet lag, and then talked a little bit about our favorite parts of the trip. And I was genuinely happy to see him, like 48 hours removed from the trip. I now consider Blake and Casey to be my friends, along with the other 16 men, 2 professors, and our alumni guests, Walt, Kathy, and Jaden Snowdell. Together, we traveled something north of 11,000 miles, put in more than 150,000 steps, and we did so as brothers, sisters, and I sincerely hope, lifelong friends. Thank you.